Mara had spent her life bringing forgotten places back to life, restoring cracked walls, giving breath to hollow halls. But nothing prepared her for Holloway Estate, because sometimes the past doesn't want to be rebuilt. Sometimes it wants to be left buried. And in the silence of that long-abandoned corridor behind a door that wasn't supposed to exist, Mara found something that had waited decades in the dark, something that remembered her name before she ever stepped inside. You can redraw the lines on a blueprint, but some rooms were never meant to be opened. Some rooms remember. The Holloway Estate was the kind of place that whispered, not literally, of course, but the creak of floorboards, the moan of old beams in the wind, the rasping sigh of leaves brushing against stained glass windows, all combined into something low and persistent, like a voice trying to be heard through stone. Mara Kingsley didn't believe in ghosts. She believed in poor insulation and uneven settling. She believed in water damage and lead paint. She believed in restoring broken things. At 34, Mara had renovated 11 historic properties across the East Coast. She was meticulous and well-respected, a name mentioned in quiet awe among preservation societies. When the call came about Holloway, it didn't feel like a job, it felt like an opportunity. 50 rooms, 4 floors. It's a beast, the estate agent warned her over the phone. But the bones are good. Mara liked good bones. She arrived in the town of Windlow under gray skies and the scent of distant rain. The Holloway Estate rose from the tree line like a crown of dark thorns. A Victorian Gothic mansion half swallowed by ivy and time, it had sat untouched for almost 70 years. The interior was worse than she expected. Thick layers of dust, warped wood, paint peeling like diseased skin. But she could see it, the strength beneath the decay. The original banister was hand-carved walnut. Leaded glass windows remained intact in most rooms. The tiles were discolored but not broken. It could be something again. After a full day of initial inspection, Mara spread the original blueprints across the long dining table. They smelled like dry parchment and old secrets. Her flashlight cast long shadows as she traced the lines with her finger. Kitchen, drawing room, parlor, ballroom, library, service stairs, bedrooms, all accounted for. Then her eyes paused on the eastern wing. There, just beyond the servants' quarters, was a narrow corridor that didn't seem to lead anywhere. At its end, a square box labeled simply as no room number, no designation, no purpose. Mara frowned. She grabbed the updated 1991 floor plan drawn during a failed attempt to convert the estate into a hotel. No such corridor, no room. Just a blank space. On that plan, the area was listed as a solid wall. Curious, she flicked through her photos from earlier in the day, swiping until she found the shot she'd taken of the eastern hallway. There was a blank stretch of wall where the corridor should be, but something was off. Zooming in, she noticed faint discoloration along the wall's edge, a line, almost imperceptible, running vertically down the plaster. And to the left, a strange bulge behind the wallpaper, like a door that had been sealed over. She leaned back in her chair, heart starting to thud, not with fear, but with fascination. Hidden rooms were not unusual in old homes. Secret parlors, wine cellars, or panic rooms were standard in estates of this era. But they were always accounted for somewhere. This wasn't. This room had no name, no number, no record. Mara looked back at the blueprint. Who builds a room? then erases it. She circled the area in red ink and made a note. Investigate eastern corridor. Remove wall paneling if necessary. It wasn't until later that she noticed the odd notation in the margin of the blueprint. Barely legible, as if erased and redrawn 100 times. It doesn't like to be drawn. The handwriting was delicate, looping, cursive. Not the kind of note an architect would leave. She blinked at it for a long time. Maybe it was a joke, or maybe it was the handwriting of someone who'd spent too long walking halls that whispered. The next morning, Mara returned. With 2 workers, Rick and Lila, both reliable, both skeptical, and led them to the eastern corridor. The stretch of wall was just as she remembered. Long, unremarkable, and silent. There's no room here, Rick said, knocking on the wall. It's solid. No, Mara replied, pressing her hand to the plaster. It looks solid. Listen. Rick raised an eyebrow but knocked again, slower. This time the sound was different. Hollow. Mara smiled. They brought in the tools. With careful precision they removed the paneling. Underneath the wallpaper and wood, they found it. A frame. A door, flush with the wall, bolted shut and covered in decades of dust and nails. No knob, just a jagged keyhole, shaped like a star. Well, I'll be damned, Lila muttered. Rick leaned closer, shining a flashlight into the keyhole. It's deep. Something's on the other side, but I can't tell what. Get me the key ring from the attic, Mara said. The one labeled Original Locks. Lila hesitated. You want to open it? Of course, Mara said, almost laughing. We don't leave rooms sealed. That's not how restoration works. But as they walked away, Mara stayed a moment longer, running her fingers over the old frame. The wood was warm, too warm. She pulled her hand back like she'd touched a stovetop. The flashlight flickered once, then went out. And just for a second, only a second, she thought she heard a whisper from behind the door. Not in the hallway, from inside the room. The key didn't fit. Not at first. Rick returned from the attic with a rusted ring of antique keys, some so ornate they looked more ceremonial than functional. Mara tried them one by one, the metal scraping against the odd, star-shaped keyhole like teeth on bone. None turned. By the 10th key, her fingers ached and her patience thinned. She inserted the 11th absent-mindedly, already prepared to call. Oh, a locksmith, and felt a faint click. A cold breeze rushed through the corridor, though none of the windows were open. Everyone paused. You felt that? Mara asked. Rick nodded slowly. Draft? Maybe? No windows in this hall, Lila said. Not even a vent. Mara turned the key. It didn't open the door, not all the way, but something inside moved. The bolt retracted with a sound like grinding teeth. Then silence. The key resisted being turned again, almost as if it were reluctant, like something didn't want to be unlocked. It's stuck now, Mara muttered, trying to wiggle the key free. I don't like this, Lila said quietly. Something's not right about this part of the house. Mara wasn't ready to admit it, but she felt the same thing. The air in this hallway had grown thick, dense with something unseen, like standing too close to a power line and not knowing why the hairs on your arm stood up. We'll come back with a drill and more light, she finally said, stepping away. We're not forcing anything until we know what's behind there. They left the corridor in uneasy silence, and Mara returned to her small workstation in what used to be the ballroom. The light through the stained glass windows had dimmed even though it was barely afternoon. She didn't get much work done. Not with her thoughts returning again and again to the door, the strange keyhole, and that brief whisper she wasn't entirely sure she'd imagined. That night, the knock came. It was 2:17 a.m. when Mara sat bolt upright in her cot. Knock, knock. She strained her ears. The sound was distant but unmistakable. Deliberate, steady, like someone tapping just hard enough to be heard. Knock. Knock. Not the front door. Not the walls. No footsteps followed, just two slow knocks, and then silence. Mara got up, heart hammering, and grabbed her flashlight. The beam trembled slightly in her grip as she moved down the hallways of the hollow mansion. It was quieter than she'd ever known a building to be. She reached the eastern corridor. It was freezing. Breath clouding in the air, Mara stepped toward the sealed door. Her flashlight flickered again. She tapped it, still flickering. A battery issue, or interference. Could old metal in the walls do that? She stepped closer to the door. It looked exactly the same, save one detail. The key was gone. The ring, the rusted antique loop, it was no longer in the lock. Mara searched the floor, the surrounding boards, even the hallway rug. Nothing. It was as if the key had never been there. Then she heard it again. Knock. But this time, it came not from behind the door, but above her. She aimed her flashlight up, just as it flickered back on. Something moved in the shadowed ceiling above the corridor. Something fast and not shaped right. She stumbled back, heart in her throat, the light sputtering in a jerky strobe that revealed only hints. Something pale, thin, too long, then silence again. The flashlight steadied. Nothing was there, but the cold lingered long after the sound was gone. Mara backed away, refusing to turn her back to the door. She didn't sleep the rest of the night. She sat in the ballroom, staring at the blueprint by candlelight. She found herself drawing over the lines again. That corridor. That room. Tracing and retracing. And once more, when she looked away and looked back, there, faint and new, scrawled. In the margin, in that same looping cursive, it knocks first. By morning, the key was back. It lay on the floor directly in front of the sealed door, untouched, gleaming slightly despite its age. Mara stared at it, still in her pajamas, coffee untouched in one hand, the other trembling. She hadn't slept. Not really. Every creak in the walls, every shifting shadow outside her temporary room kept her alert. But the key's reappearance pushed her toward a decision she wasn't ready to admit last night. She had to open the door. Rick and Lila arrived just after 9, both bleary-eyed but in good spirits. She didn't tell them about the knock or the disappearing key. Not yet. "Let's get this open today," Mara said, voice steadier than she felt. They brought a crowbar, an impact driver, and a box of floodlights to compensate for the mansion's unreliable wiring. Within an hour, the old bolts gave way with groans and crackles. The frame shifted slightly, as though relaxing after decades of pressure. The door creaked open just a few inches before stopping abruptly. It wasn't jammed, it was held, as if something on the other side had only allowed it to open so far. Mara leaned into the gap and peered inside. Total darkness. Not the kind of dark you get from a room with no light. This was darker than that. The Light from the hallway barely penetrated beyond the threshold. Mara reached out with her flashlight and clicked it on, the beam strong and focused until it hit the air inside the room. Then it just stopped. The light ended midair like it had struck velvet, absorbed instantly. Rick and Lila hesitated behind her. "Should we force it open more?" Rick asked. Mara looked back, uncertain. "Maybe." Then a breath of air escaped the room, stale, warm, and thick with the smell of earth and rot. They all stepped back instinctively. The door pushed itself open 2 more inches. No one touched it. No wind blew. Rick cursed and dropped the crowbar. "I don't like this, Mara. I've worked a lot of creepy places, but this feels wrong." Mara couldn't disagree. Every part of her screamed to close the door, board it up, and forget this room ever existed. Instead, she picked up the floodlight. "I just want to look," she said. 2 minutes. "Be careful," Lila murmured. "Seriously." Mara stepped into the doorway. Immediately the air felt wrong, thick and heavy, as though she'd walked underwater. Her ears popped. The light from behind her dimmed, then vanished. The moment her foot crossed the threshold, the hallway ceased to exist. She was somewhere else. She could still see the frame of the door behind her, but beyond it there was only darkness. Ahead, the room stretched on, undefined. Her flashlight failed entirely, even at full power. Still, she took another step forward, then 2 more. The sound changed. There was no echo, no creaking wood beneath her boots, just her breath, and a soft humming, so low it almost wasn't there, like the vibration of a sound that was being withheld. She waved the floodlight in slow arcs. On the 3rd pass, something caught her beam. A wooden chair, simple, old-fashioned, facing the far corner. Someone had etched deep grooves into the floor, around it, like claw marks, as if someone had been dragged there or had tried to leave and failed. On the seat sat a tape recorder, small, outdated. It was on, no tape, no power, but still, it ran. Mara stepped closer, and then the whisper came, right next to her ear. Mara. She froze, her name, plain, precise, whispered by a voice she didn't recognize and couldn't forget. Neither male nor female, just empty. A memory of a voice, a suggestion. She turned to run, and the door was further away. Not closed, just farther. She hadn't moved, but the threshold was now 10 feet behind her. The light from the corridor beyond flickered like a candle in a windless room. Then, knock, from inside the room, not behind her, not in front, beneath her feet. Mara ran. She didn't remember the motion, just the sound of her boots hitting invisible ground, the rush of air as she broke through the threshold. She collapsed into Rick's arms, gasping, heart racing. "What happened?" Lila asked, kneeling. "I don't know," Mara breathed. "There's something in there. A chair. A recorder. It said my name." Rick turned, stepping toward the door, but the moment he approached, it slammed shut. Hard. The key fell out of the lock again, clinking to the floor like punctuation. None of them reached to pick it up. They didn't speak much after the door slammed. The sound had echoed through the house like a cannon blast, rattling the old windows and silencing every creak of the structure. Even the birds outside had gone quiet. The kind of silence that didn't feel natural. That didn't last unless something demanded it. Mara stared at the key lying on the floor. It looked different now, less rusted, almost polished, as if it had been handled or fed. She didn't pick it up. Lila broke the silence first. "We should leave." "We can't just leave," Mara replied, still breathless. "That room, it's part of this place." Rick crossed his arms. It wasn't yesterday. Mara knew how it sounded. She'd seen it with her own eyes. The hallway had been solid wall. Now it wasn't. And the room, Room Zero, as she'd started calling it in her notes, was real. It had depth. It had contents. It had sound. But it didn't behave like a room. It felt like a mind with its own heartbeat. And that heartbeat was getting louder. That night Mara couldn't sleep. Not from fear, exactly, but a pull. Her thoughts kept returning to the chair, the clawed floor, the voice that knew her name. The room hadn't just acknowledged her. It had waited for her. At 1:41 a.m., she got up and checked the blueprint again. And there it was. The door, drawn, clearly now, complete with measurements, position, and a label she didn't remember writing. Room O, the circle, wasn't a number. It was a symbol, a loop with no start and no end. Beneath it, written in red ink, not her handwriting, were the words, "It only opens for you." She stepped back, breath shallow. Her hands were clean, her pen untouched. The page, however, was wet, with ink. Still, drying, she didn't remember writing it, didn't remember picking up the pen, but the message was there, undeniably real, just like the door. The next morning, Rick didn't show up. He didn't call, didn't text. His van was gone from the lot. No one answered when Mara or Lila called. By noon, the sheriff's office sent someone to check his apartment. Empty, no signs of struggle, just his phone, left charging, and his wallet on the kitchen counter, like he'd stepped out for a second and forgotten to come back. Lila didn't take it well. He was fine yesterday. "Mara!" she snapped. He joked about the floor tiles. He asked me if I thought the plumbing was cursed. That's not someone planning to disappear. I know. No, you don't know. You don't see what this place is doing. We opened something, and you're acting like it's just another part of the job. Mara didn't reply, because Lila wasn't wrong. But what she couldn't say out loud, what had twisted like a worm in her thoughts all morning, was that Mara had felt Rick leave. She'd woken at 3:12 a.m., gasping, cold sweat clinging to her back. In that exact moment she'd sensed someone moving down the eastern corridor, backward, slow, unnatural. Then the door had creaked. Not opened, just acknowledged. She hadn't gone to check, and now Rick was gone. Later that evening, as the sun bled orange through the mansion's long windows, Mara finally approached the sealed door again. The key was still there, still gleaming, still waiting. She knelt beside it and reached out. The moment her fingers touched the metal, her vision shifted. She wasn't in the hallway anymore. She stood in room 0. No door behind her. Just the chair. Just the recorder. Just the dark. And behind her, breathing. Not human breathing. Slow and ragged, like lungs too large for ribs. Like something remembering how to mimic life. Then it spoke, but not aloud. The voice pressed itself directly into her head. "You found me again." Mara fell backward, eyes wide. The key clattered from her hand, and the hallway returned in a single, sharp blink, like waking from a dream that had teeth. She was panting, shaking. The corridor was silent. The key now looked as it had on day one, rusted, cold, inert. But she knew what it was now. It wasn't a key to open the room, it was the room's way in, a connection, a tether. And now she had touched it. That night, her voice played from the tape recorder, even though it had no tape, even though no one had pressed record. It echoed softly through the walls of the Holloway estate, skipping like a broken record. You found me again. You found me again. You found me again. Mara stopped leaving the second floor. She started sleeping on the old velvet chaise in the West Solarium, close enough to the eastern corridor to hear if the door moved, but far enough that she could convince herself it wouldn't. The house had changed, not visibly, not on paper, but in feeling. The walls pulsed subtly, like breath through plaster. The chandelier in the dining room swayed sometimes, though no breeze moved through the house. Doors she swore she closed were open in the morning, and sometimes, when she walked down the grand staircase, she heard music, classical, distant, and warped, like it was coming from a phonograph that had been buried alive. Lila had stopped coming. She left a message. I care about you, but this place is wrong. Rick is gone. You won't listen. I hope you call me before it gets you too. Mara didn't return the message. It was better that way, because now she was certain of something no one else could understand. The house was trying to remember itself, and she was the only one listening. The next time she entered room 0, she didn't use the key. She simply woke up inside it. There was no moment of transition, no corridor, no door. 1 second she was asleep on the chaise, wrapped in a quilt, from the guest room. The next, she was standing barefoot in the dark, her breath visible, her heart slow. Not frightened, but resigned. Like her body had finally agreed to what her mind had been resisting. The room was different now. Larger. The chair remained in its corner, unmoved, but behind it rose a wall of photographs. Hundreds of them, thumbtacked to the air itself. They floated, suspended in the thick black like flies in amber. Some were so faded they looked like smoke, others sharp as if freshly printed. They were all of her. Childhood photos. Her college graduation. Candid moments. Reading at a coffee shop, looking out the window on a train, brushing her teeth in a hotel mirror in Florence. Even one of her, as a baby, held by her mother. Some she recognized. Some she didn't. A photo of her in a gray dress, standing in front of a building she'd never seen. Another of her crying in a dark room lit by candlelight, blood on her shirt. One of her asleep in what looked like this room. She stepped closer, drawn by a trembling need to understand. Then, a voice behind her. You left me here. She turned. Nothing. But she felt it now. A presence in the room with her. Watching. Waiting. Its emotions pressed into her skull like fingers through wet clay. Grief, hunger, betrayal. And then something sharper. Longing. Not to hurt her, but to join her. To be remembered. Himari Tashihi. Backed toward the chair. The recorder on the seat clicked on. No one touched it. Her own voice played once more. But this time, it was a different sentence. If you're hearing this, then I already let it out. Her blood went cold. She hadn't said those words. Not yet, but she would. or someone wearing her voice would. The wall behind the photos began to shift, not physically but conceptually, as if space bent inward, revealing another space, deeper still. Not a second room, not a basement. A mind. Room 0 was not a chamber in the house. It was the house. A compression point, a clot in time and identity, a place where memory decayed into something sentient. She saw it clearly now, just for a moment, a shape not built from walls, but from her. Skin, yes, but made of wood and dust. Eyes, but stitched into the windows. Its breath moved through vents. Its spine was the staircase. Its limbs were halls. It had no face, only photos in frames that shifted when no one looked. It wasn't haunted. It was her. She had brought it here. Or maybe she had always been here, and everything outside, the people, the restoration, the blueprints, that was the dream. Room 0 was waking up, with her inside it. She turned to flee, but there was no door now. Only darkness, unfolding like a mouth. The recorder whispered again and again. If you're hearing this, then I already let it out. If you're hearing this, then I already let it out. If you're hearing this... The floor changed first. Mara didn't know how long. She'd been standing in room 0. Time melted in here. Minutes stretched like old gum. Thin, flavorless, infinite. But eventually, when her knees ached and her breath began to crystallize in the still air, she noticed the floor beneath the chair beginning to shimmer. At first, it looked like water. Then, like glass. Then, unmistakably, a mirror. She stepped forward, drawn to it despite the electric chill skittering down her spine. Something deep inside warned her not to look, that this was the last place in the house she'd still be herself. But she looked anyway. It was her reflection. But not her. The thing in the mirror wore her face like skin. Too perfectly. The smile was too wide, the eyes a shade too black. It mimicked her posture, her breath, her blinking, but there was intent behind it. It didn't reflect. It waited, and then it moved, not in sync. It raised its hand when she did not. Its smile widened when she stepped back, and it whispered, "I've lived here longer than you have." Mara staggered, heart pounding, hands grasping, for the chair as her legs gave out. The air had thickened again. Something wet dripped from the ceiling. Not water, ink. Thick and dark, it pooled along the corners of the room and seeped into the grain of the floorboards. From somewhere in the distance, a door creaked. Not room 0's door. Another door. A memory she didn't remember having. A hallway with peeling wallpaper. A yellow nightlight. Her father's voice behind a closed door, whispering things not meant for her. Her mother crying quietly downstairs. Mara clutched her head, images pounding behind her eyes. They weren't memories. They were entries. Stories someone else had placed inside her, like pages from a book she'd never read but somehow knew. By heart, and in every memory, the mirror was always there, sometimes hanging in the hallway, sometimes embedded in the floor, once inside a coffin. It watched her grow. It watched her forget. It had always been part of her life. Only now did she realize it was never a mirror. It was a window, and something on the other side had been looking through. Always. She stumbled back toward the edge of the room, trying to find the threshold, but room 0 had shifted again. No door, no chair, only the mirror. She faced it again. The reflection no longer tried to mimic her. It stood on its own, staring back. Its face now held no expression, just stillness. Hunger, too old to look menacing. Resigned, maybe, like it had waited too long to pretend anymore. And then it spoke, again with her voice, but deeper, wet, as though spoken from behind a wall of flesh. This was never your house. You were just the first one to come home. The floor beneath the mirror cracked, fractures spiderwebbed across it, glass splitting into gleaming veins. With every pulse of the house's breath, the cracks deepened. Something beneath the mirror was trying to rise. Not crawl. Rise. Mara ran. There was no door, but she ran anyway. Into the dark, through the walls, along the edges of memory and space. She passed things that shouldn't exist. A hallway lit by moonlight but with no windows. A room where she watched herself sleep. A nursery with no child, only a crib filled with rotted blueprints and humming static. And at the center of it all, just out of sight, always watching, was the mirror. She could feel it behind every wall. It didn't want her dead. It wanted her present, so it could finally leave. When she collapsed on the floor again, whether hours or days later, she was back in the ballroom. The stained glass windows glowed with soft afternoon light. Dust floated peacefully in the air. The world felt normal. Too normal. She sat up slowly, eyes scanning every inch of the room. No mirror, no ink, no recorder. But something had changed. The chandelier now hung perfectly straight, when before it had. Always leaned slightly to the left. The wallpaper was clean. No water damage, no stains, and the plans spread out on the table were complete room. 0 was now part of the blueprint. Labeled clearly, boxed in red. Not as an error or anomaly. As a primary room one word written over it in a looping script she now recognized as her own. Master Mara didn't remember drawing the new plans. But there they were, sprawled across the long oak table in the ballroom, crisp and freshly inked. The lines were too neat. Not her usual rough drafts or the charcoal sketches she'd become known for. These looked like they'd come from a plotter printer. Only, no machine had done this, and no one else had entered the house. She stared at the section labeled Room U, Master. It wasn't just part of the blueprint now, it was the heart of it. The surrounding rooms had rearranged themselves to accommodate it. A corridor redirected, a stairwell added, and at the center, Room U pulsed on the page. Not visually, but she could feel it, like a drumbeat in the floorboards. A pulse she hadn't noticed before, but now couldn't ignore. She didn't ask who had redrawn the plans. She was beginning to understand. The house had always been building towards something. Restoring itself, yes, but also reforming. Remodeling its memory. Filling in gaps. She was its architect, and she had forgotten that. That night, Mara returned to the eastern hallway. The key was gone. There was no need for it anymore. The door, too. Room U stood wide open, but it wasn't dark, not anymore. Inside, golden light spilled out, warm and inviting, like a hearth lit for a returning traveler. The walls inside were now lined with portraits, architectural sketches, blueprints, family trees, and dozens of old photos. Many of them showed her, not just her life, her work, buildings she'd never seen before, but that bore her signature, on plaques designed by Monsieur Holloway. Even the house itself, The Holloway estate was listed in the records, but she hadn't built this place. She'd inherited it or returned to it. At the far end of the room, a man stood by a drafting table, back turned. He wore an old-fashioned suit, sleeves rolled up, hands ink-stained. His hair was graying, posture straight, the kind of presence that fills a room before it speaks. Mara's voice cracked when she asked, "Who are you?" He didn't turn. "An echo," he said calmly, "of the first hand that drew this house into existence, and of the last mind it needed to wake again." Mara stepped forward. "You built this? I imagined it. But you finished it. I don't understand." He finally turned. His face was almost hers. Masculine, aged, but unmistakably similar. The same eyes, the same scar at the left eyebrow. Her father hadn't had that scar, but her grandfather had. He smiled softly. "That's because you haven't remembered yet." He gestured to the table. A fresh blueprint lay open, drawn in black ink. It showed the estate, but larger now. An additional wing, unmarked and unfinished. A note scribbled in the margin. "Begin excavation beneath room O." She looked at him, breath tight. "What's down there?" He placed a gentle hand on the paper. His voice was quieter now, reverent. "Foundation. Root. Source. Every house begins with a secret buried deep. And when you dig it up," he looked up at her, this time no smile. "You build around it, or it consumes you." Mara felt it then, a soft rumble under her feet. The sound of earth remembering what had been hidden. Something old. Moving. The house wasn't just remembering itself, it was growing. She spent the next day in room U. There was no time anymore, just tasks. She traced the new blueprints. Redrew rooms she hadn't known existed. At one point she blacked out and woke to find new ink stains on her hands, a drafting knife by her side, and a freshly carved word into the table. "Welcome back." She should have been afraid. But something deeper than fear had settled inside her now. A kind of belonging, like she'd stopped resisting a tide she'd been drowning in her whole life. The house didn't want her soul. It wanted her skills. Later, as night fell, she stood in front of a new door, not room O. A fresh door, rough wood, old handle, nailed shut from the inside. There was no blueprint for this one, just a carved message burned into the frame, "Only the architect may enter." Mara placed her hand on the doorknob. It was warm. The moment she touched it, she heard the voice of the man, her echo, one last time. "Once you open this, you finish what we started. You give it form, and it gives you memory." She didn't hesitate. She turned the knob, and the house exhaled. The door opened. It wasn't a loud sound, more of a shift, as if the house itself were drawing in a breath. The air felt heavier. On the other side, dense and thick, as though the door had been locked not just with wood and iron, but with time itself. Mara stepped through. The room on the other side was a tunnel. Not wide, not tall, just long, narrow. It was dark, but her eyes adjusted quickly, drawn to the faint glow that came from deep within the stone walls. Not light, not a bulb, a presence. The glow felt almost like it was alive. At first, she didn't notice the walls were moving, but when she looked closer, she saw it. The stone, carved from rock, once smooth, now eroded, was alive. The walls shifted, not by the inch, but by the centimeter, slowly folding inward like the pages of a book. The house was expanding, growing beneath the surface, reaching down, and she had opened the way. Her footsteps echoed too loudly now. The walls seemed to swallow the sound, turning it into whispers. There were voices beneath the stone, distant and broken, speaking in languages she couldn't understand. Words without context, without meaning. She walked faster, her heart pounding in rhythm with the thumping in the walls. Every footstep made the earth beneath her feet vibrate as though the house itself was breathing her in. At the far end of the tunnel, the glow grew brighter. It was like a hearth, warm and familiar but foreign all the same. She approached, the thudding in her chest matching the increasing thrum of the house. When she reached the end of the tunnel, she saw it. A door. Simple, wooden, unremarkable at first glance. But it wasn't the door that caught her attention. It was what was inside. The floor beneath it had cracked away, revealing a vast, hollowed-out cavern beneath the estate. A cavern that stretched far, far deeper than the house should have ever allowed. At the center of the pit stood a statue, an unmarked figure carved from stone, towering and shrouded in shadow. Its face was obscured, but it had the body of a man and the wings of something. Not quite angelic, not quite human. It was old, too old to belong in any time Mara knew. And yet it was familiar. The statue stood atop a broken pedestal, but as Mara approached, the air around her grew colder. The walls of the cavern groaned, the stone creaking like a ship about to sink. The shadow seemed to shift on its own, as though the stone figure was alive. Then came the voice. It wasn't spoken aloud. It was more like a ripple in the air, moving through her bones, wrapping itself around her like a whisper. One that didn't just speak to her mind, but pulled her forward. "You've come back. At last." Her breath caught. The words weren't familiar. Not in the way a memory is familiar. These words carried a weight, a history. They carried a purpose. She stepped forward, despite the sinking feeling in her stomach, despite the warnings, in the corners of her mind. The air in the cavern felt thicker now, like it was pressing in on her, suffocating her. And the statue, it moved. Not in the way a person moves, with limbs and fluidity, but with an unnatural, sudden grace that made the shadows around it bend. It turned slowly to face her, and for the first time, Myra saw its eyes. They weren't eyes. They were gaps. Black voids, sunken deep into the stone, as though the very concept of sight had been carved into the statue's face and forgotten. But they looked at her. The whisper in her bones grew louder. "You found the blueprint. You uncovered the door." It wasn't a voice now, it was a presence, a flood of sensation that made her knees shake. "You built me again. You remembered me." Mara staggered back. "I didn't build anything. I didn't know. You are my architect," it said, its voice no longer a whisper but a deep rumble, like earth grinding against stone. "I have waited for you. You have come home. Now." The shadows twisted around the statue, pulling inward like tendrils, alive, sentient. They snaked toward her, reaching for her legs, her arms, the back of her neck. She fought against them. But they felt her. The cold pressure of fingers she could not see or touch wrapped themselves around her like a second skin. "Now, you finish what you started. You awaken the rest." The shadows pulled harder, dragging her toward the statue, toward the gaping, empty eyes of the thing. It didn't want her alive, not in the way a person wants life. It wanted her to join. Her vision blurred. The walls closed in. She felt it then. The house was more than just a building. It was a memory, a dream, a trap, and she was the final piece. Mara gasped, her back hitting cold stone. She hadn't even realized she'd fallen. Her breath came ragged, shallow, but she was still alive. The shadows retreated as the thing paused, watching her with its empty eyes. It didn't move. Not yet. It was waiting. The house. The room. It was waiting for her to finish it. To finish what she had started. The ground shifted beneath her feet. The walls groaned again. The house was changing, and somewhere, deep inside her chest, a deep, hollow ache echoed. Welcome home. Mara couldn't breathe. The air around her had grown thick, like the weight of the earth itself was pressing down on her chest. The shadows were still curling at her feet, pulling at her like ropes. She could feel them, sliding up her legs, around her arms, trying to merge with her, pulling her into the stone, the foundation. The voice, that voice, sounded again, not as a whisper, but as if the walls themselves were speaking directly into her skull. You built me. You forgot me. Now you will complete the design. Mara's heart raced. She was not part of the plan. She hadn't chosen this. This wasn't what she wanted. But something in her, the house, did. And it knew her, more than she knew herself. The shadows twisted tighter, pulling her closer to the pedestal. She could almost feel the stone of the figure against her skin, the coldness of it seeping through her clothing. The statue's hollow eyes were still staring at her, unblinking, unfeeling. It was alive, in some twisted way, but it was an extension of something else, something older. The blueprint is incomplete, it continued, its voice no longer just words but sensations that made her skin crawl. I am incomplete, and you will finish it. She pushed against the stone floor, but her hands slipped. Wet, as if the house itself were sweating, weeping from the cracks in the foundation. The shadows tightened their hold on her, dragging her closer to the figure. It wanted her. No, it needed her. The house needed her to become the final piece. The missing. A link. The architect who would restore it, not just as a structure of wood and stone, but as something else, something that existed outside time, outside memory. The house wasn't just a house, it was a machine, a living, breathing entity that had been constructed not by physical hands, but by the architect's blood. And Mara was that architect. Her mind flickered back to the blueprint. Room O. Her hand had drawn it. Her hand had created that room, the center, the heart. She had sealed it, then forgotten it, hidden it beneath layers of time and space, but it had always been there, pulsing like a heartbeat beneath the house. She was the reason the house was alive, and now she had come back to finish it. But how? She didn't have the answers. Yet, the walls of the cavern began to crack. It wasn't a simple fracture. No, it was a tearing. The stone pulling apart as though the earth itself could no longer contain what was inside. A deep, low rumble shook through the ground beneath her, and the shadows started to recede, leaving her trembling in the dim, cold light. The statue's hollow eyes stared at her, but it was no longer its voice speaking. It was hers. The words formed in her mind, clearer now than ever before. The blueprint. The final door is within you. You will unlock it, or you will be consumed by it. The darkness around her began to twist. It wasn't just the shadows. It was the house itself. The walls, the floor, the very stone of the cavern seemed to pull in on itself, vibrating with the ancient power that had been buried beneath the ground. Something was awakening, something vast and unnameable, and it needed her to finish it. The ground beneath her feet shifted again, and Mara felt something deep in her chest, a gnawing, gnashing hunger. The shadows weren't simply pulling her in. They were drawing something out. They were bringing the part of her that had been sealed away for so long, the part of her that had designed this place, that had known its secrets, that had forgotten. You cannot outrun the blueprint, the voice said again, but this time it was clearer. No longer just in her mind, but in the room itself. It was the voice of the house, the voice of the foundation, the voice of the architect. you will remember. Who you are. Her hand shot out. She could feel it now. The ink on her fingertips. The memories flooding back. The designs, the intricate lines, the calculations. She had drawn it all before. Every room, every corridor, every detail. It had all been part of a larger plan, a greater purpose, and she had never seen it until now. Her chest tightened as the realization hit her. She had built it. She had created this. The house was hers, just as she was its. The foundation, the walls, the rooms, they were all connected, a system designed to awaken when the architect returned. But she wasn't just the architect. She was the key. The walls of the cavern parted as if they had been waiting for her touch. A small panel of stone slid away, revealing an inscription. One she hadn't remembered writing, but one she recognized. For the architect, the house shall rise. Her fingers traced the words. The shadows disappeared, retreating into the walls. The statue before her began to crumble, its stone limbs breaking apart as though it had been holding a secret too long. And beneath it, a passageway opened, a tunnel that led deeper into the earth. The blueprint was complete, and it wasn't a blueprint for a house anymore. It was a blueprint for something else, something beyond her understanding, something alive. Mara stepped forward, knowing what she had to do. She would walk down that passageway. She would finish what she had started, and in doing so, she would become a part of the house, its final piece, its architect, its legacy. The house had waited for her, and now it was time for her to wake it up. Mara's footsteps echoed in the passageway, each step heavier than the last. She didn't know how far the tunnel stretched beneath the house, but it didn't matter. The walls closed in around her, the air thick with the pulse of something ancient, something not of the earth but woven into its very bones. The passage wasn't just a tunnel, it was alive. The stone seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like lungs as if it were a living organism. The walls were now warm, pulsing with energy beneath her hands as she moved forward, guiding herself deeper into the heart of the house. With every step, the house seemed to whisper, "You are close now." The air tasted metallic, and her throat burned with each breath. She could feel the weight of time pressing down on her. The memories she had forced into the deepest recesses of her mind, memories of designs, of rooms, of spaces, began to resurface, like long-forgotten pieces of a puzzle that were now snapping together with terrifying clarity. She could hear the architect's voice in her head, echoing through the dark. "You built me, Mara. You crafted every room, every line, every mistake, every secret." The passage twisted sharply, narrowing, forcing her to crouch. The walls felt tight against her, the air suffocating. But it wasn't the walls that were closing in. It was the house itself. It was, recognizing her as its creator, the architect who had built it and had now returned to finish the work. There were no more sounds now, no more whispers, only the steady drum of her heartbeat and the unshakable feeling that the house was watching her, listening and waiting. At the end of the passage, the walls opened into a vast, hollow chamber as deep as the earth itself. The floor was slick with dark liquid that shimmered like oil under the flickering light of 1,000 unseen candles. The walls were covered with intricate carvings, symbols, shapes, and diagrams she could not understand, though their presence was undeniable. The symbols seemed to move, twisting and shifting as if they were written in a language that wanted to be known but had long been forgotten. At the center of the room stood a structure, half-formed and half-submerged in the dark, liquid. It was a tower of stone, an unfinished monument that seemed to stretch up to infinity, its surface etched with more of the same strange symbols. And at the very top, Mara could see the faintest outline of a door. The door. Her door. The door she had drawn all those years ago. The one that had never been placed in any blueprint. The one she had forgotten, yet it had always been here, in the heart of the house. "You remember now," the voice said, rising from the depths of the chamber. "This is where you began. This is where you end." Mara stood frozen, the liquid lapping at her boots as she stared at the door, realizing the enormity of what she had been called to do. The house had been waiting for her, yes, but it had also been waiting for this moment, the moment when the architect would open the door and awaken what had been hidden for so long. She could feel the weight of it in her chest, the anticipation, the dread, the responsibility. It was not just a door. It was the door. The one she had designed without realizing it. The one that would unlock the final part of the blueprint, the part that had always been missing. And as she took a step forward, the liquid beneath her began to stir, bubbling like an awakening creature. Something was coming. The moment she touched the door, everything fell silent. The air became still, thick with an unnatural quiet. Her fingers lingered on the cold metal, feeling the pulse of something on the other side. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something else, something deeper. She pushed the door open. At first, there was only darkness. But then, as the door creaked wider, a soft light spilled from the other side. A light that was not warm, but cold. Ancient. The air was heavy with the scent of dust, of something forgotten for millennia. The room beyond was not like the others, in the house. It was not made of wood or stone or brick. It was made of nothing. A void. An emptiness that stretched out forever. But there, at the center of the void, was something. A figure. Not a man. Not a woman. Not even a thing of flesh or bone. It was a being of pure shadow, its body shifting and pulsing like the house itself. It seemed to exist outside time, outside form, yet it was undeniable. It was the thing that had always been here, waiting for her to open the door. The architect, the creator, the one who had shaped the house. It was her. Mara felt her breath catch in her throat. She recognized the figure in the void. It was her, but it wasn't. It was the person who had built the house, the one who had designed the blueprint, the one who had created this place and everything in it. It was the source, and it was waiting for her. "Welcome home, Mara." The voice came not from the figure but from the house itself, as if every stone, every wall, every breath of air in the room was speaking through it. Her knees buckled, and she fell to the ground, her hands trembling as she reached out toward the figure. It reached out to her, too. "It is time," the voice continued. "Time to awaken. Time to finish what you began." Mara felt the energy of the house coursing through her, filling her, connecting her to the very bones of the structure. The house had never just been a building. It had always been a being, a consciousness waiting for the architect to return, waiting for her to complete it. The shadows, the house, the architect, the blueprint were all one now. She had awakened it, and in doing so, she had awakened herself. As the figure's hand touched hers, The ground beneath Mara's feet shattered, and the darkness swept through her like a flood, pouring into every corner of her mind. The house, her creation, her design, was no longer just a house. It was alive, and it was complete. The last room, the last piece, the final breath of the architect. Mara felt herself becoming one with it. The lines of the blueprint blurred, the memories faded, and the house's purpose was fulfilled. And then there was only silence. The architect had awakened. The final words of this haunting tale echo through the shadows. Remember, this story is just the beginning. If you want to uncover more secrets, unravel more chilling mysteries, and step deeper into the abyss of silent horror, make sure you subscribe to the channel. The darkness is waiting, and every twist, every turn, holds a new terror. Don't miss. Out, hit that subscribe button and join me for the next spine-tingling adventure. Until then, remember, the house is always watching. The blueprint is always waiting. Stay silent, stay haunted. Good night, and welcome to the silent horror.